Hello, everyone. It is 6:30 on Saturday evening, and I figured I would let you start the week with the deck tech. So this will go up Sunday, June the 9th, if I can get my dates correct. And we'll start the week with the deck techs and end the week with the podcast, so that we start the week, talking about cards and stuff, and then we end the week on the Homeward Path like we're supposed to. Sound reasonable? Because I think it does. I am headed to my mother's to pick up something, so I figured this was as good a time as any to get this out of the way. For starters, and don't worry when I lean close, I'm just trying to look and see what traffic looks like. Last week, I put up the poll on Facebook, in the Facebook group, and on Twitter about which deck you all wanted to see when we did the next episode. Obviously, we did Rakdos Aggro for the last one, and that deck was sweet. But the poll on Twitter was completely and utterly inconclusive. There was a dead heat split right down the middle. We had 50% even in both directions for Lucas Faley's Gruul deck and is it Phoenix? So the tiebreaker went to the Facebook group, and vote they did, because we got an overwhelming amount of requests for Luke's Gruul deck. To start with, Lucas Faley's Gruul deck is like none of the others you see on like the various outlets, Arena deck list, Twitter, Twitch, whatever. Because Luke isn't bothering with all this 4 and 5 drop nonsense. Luke's Gruul deck is built with the same thing in mind that my Rakdos Aggro is. Play the most efficient, fastest, most straight line speed possible way to get the opponent dead. That is the goal, that is the mindset, that is what this deck is doing. Not Gruul, then smash. That is the entire purpose behind this deck, and it's sweet. I love it. So, unlike the Rakdos deck, we don't have a lot of 1-drops to talk about, which is a little bit unusual for something we're calling aggro, but we're not generously calling it aggro. It's still really, really aggressive. But if you hit your curve, if you curve 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 3, as the case may be. Sorry, railroad tracks. If you curve 1, 2, 3, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, or whatever, you might have the fastest clock in Standard. Like, barring the, Dreadhorde Arcanist, Collision Colossus, Thud, combo, whatever that thing is that Dev from Strictly Better MTG has covered. I don't know. I don't trust that as a deck. It's really cool. It's not something I'm going to play. But Lucas Faley's Gruul deck has 2 very important things going for it. 1, the fastest clock in Standard, bar none, I would argue. Because it's the only deck I've seen in Standard right now that consistently will kill you on or around turn 4. Mono red can, if it draws the right mix of spells and if the cards flow right and all that good stuff. But this deck, there is a clearly defined path of 1, 2, 3, anything. After your first 3 turns of your optimal opening, your opponent is dead on the board. Even on the draw, your opponent is dead on board, and if you have, double 2-drop haste creature or 2-drop haste creature burn spell, your opponent's still real close to dead. If your opponent's answer to being dead on board isn't exactly like Kaya's Wrath, they're still dead on the board if you have a burn spell or a Colossus. This deck is just unrelentingly vicious, and I love it. I'm here for this. So, to start with, as we did with the Rakdos deck, we're going to start with the 1-drop, and we're not going to have nearly as much to talk about with this card. The card is Pelt Collector. I don't really feel like I need to talk at length about what Pelt Collector does in a deck like this. You play it on turn 1, and then you play stronger creatures, and Pelt Collector gets stronger, and your opponent dies. It seems like the gist of what's going on here. Notable in this shell because, you know, creatures come in, creatures die, you know, maybe your first Pelt Collector dies and helps fuel your second one, whatever the case may be. Just the card is really, really good at hitting the ground running, helping you do what your deck wants to do. Well, then we go to 2 mana, and there are a lot of them. I believe Luke's list was playing 10. 4 copies of Growth Chamber Guardian, which is basically your only real source of heavy card advantage in this deck, which is a little bit of an outlier compared to a lot of the other Gruul decks, which are wanting to play like Growth Chamber Guardian alongside a bunch of other stuff that generate value and just be a little bit aggressive. This deck, like Growth Chamber Guardian, is the least aggressive thing you're doing. And then the other 2 drops, there's 3 copies each of Zerta Goblin, which is Riot, 2 mana, 2/2. As somebody who played a lot of Scab Clan Mauler in its time in Standard, which is just a significantly worse Magic card because you never got to choose which mode you got. Also, you never had a mode that was a 2/2 with haste. Like, I'll put it that way. I played a lot of Scab Clan Mauler on one end, and on the other end, playing Gruul Aggro during Alara Shadowmoor Standard, where I was trying to curve 1-drop aggressive creature like Wild Nacatl into like the 2-drop 2/2 haste for red and a green into Boggart Ramgang in Standard. I was trying to do something really similar there. The fact that sometimes it's also just a 3/3 that your opponent is less capable of attacking into in your aggro matchups, like the fact that you get a choice, because I've played the other version, I've played either version of this card before, and getting to have both in the same Magic card without a drawback. Like with Scab Clan Mauler, I had to be dealing damage in order to get the 3/3 for 2. It was a 3/3 with trample, but it was still a 3/3 for 2. That was basically what we were here for. To the point that variations on the red aggro deck at the time were playing, or the Gruul aggro deck at the time rather, were splashing white to play Savannah, or well, I guess technically green was the splash. It was like a Boros deck wins that was splashing green. But they were playing like Isamaru, Hound of Khanda, and Savannah Lions at 1 mana, and then was, you know, Isamaru, Savannah Lions, and Curd Ape at 1 mana, and then they were playing Watchwolf and Scab Clan Mauler at 2 mana. Watchwolf being just a 3/3 for 2. And this thing sometimes is a 3/3 for 2, sometimes it's 2/2 haste for 2. You get to choose. I love getting choices, especially in my aggressive decks, because you don't normally have that. And then last but not least is Thorn Lieutenant, which is a concession to the might that is Teferi Time Raveler. At least I would assume as much. The card's also just really good in your aggro mirrors. It still applies enough pressure to a lot of control decks, and the fact that, like, if you put your opponent on Moment of Craving / Shock / Shivan Fire / you know, Cry of the Carnarium, just playing a Pelt Collector into 3/3, into 2/3, into, you know, not casting your Growth Chamber Guardians until you can immediately adapt them and force your opponent to interact, like, that's not nothing. That's the fact that there's a little bit of wiggle room in how you play this deck is what I think gives it so much juice. What I love so much about it. But all of these 2-drops are really effective at what they do. They give you way more value than they should at 2 mana. You know, in the case, you know, our Zerta Goblin's pretty easy to talk about. Thorn Lieutenant is a mana sink. If you start to flood out, you just have 6 mana you can't spend because you don't have any spells. You can just start forcing your opponent to have a removal spell every turn by pumping the Thorn Lieutenant into lethal every turn. That's fine. They gotta have it. And if they do, you still get a 1/1. You're still applying a little bit of pressure. But it's also worth noting that with the standard format the way it is right now, I would argue your 2 and 3 drops need to pass what I like to call the Teferi test, Teferi Time Raveler test, where how effective are they if you never get to untap with them, is the metric that I'm talking about. And in the case of Thorn Lieutenant, it's great against Teferi Time Raveler because they play Teferi, bounce Thorn Lieutenant, and then you kill Teferi with the 1/1 and replay the Thorn Lieutenant. Or you just jam one of your 3-drops down their throat and kill the Teferi with the 1/1 that was left over. Like, these are all perfectly reasonable solutions. And I would be remiss if I didn't start talking about our 3-drops, because there's 8 of them. There's 4 copies each of Gruul Spellbreaker and Legion Warboss. Now, we're going to start with the Legion Warboss because we talked about it a little bit in the last deck. Occupies a very similar role here, but Luke is way more committed to it. First of all, there's nothing like a Judith or a Midnight Reaper to draw him away. But more than that, there's also the fact that the card is just one of the strongest things to untap with in Standard right now. Especially if you're wanting to get aggressive against these like Command the Dread Horde and Planeswalker and Nexus and Mass Manipulation decks. You just jam a threat and get them dead. And there's not a threat that creates more of a scaling opportunity for damage than Legion Warboss. Because, you know, again, on its own, it attacks for 1, and then it attacks for 5, and then it attacks for... And then the numbers just start to spiral out of control. You attack with it, you untap with it once, you're attacking your opponent for 5 across 3 bodies. Now they got to do something about this. Like, it is a turn delay Siege Gang Commander that also costs 2 less mana. You get a Siege Gang Commander for 3 mana, essentially, because you're getting 5 power across multiple bodies. Obviously, the difference is you don't get all the bodies up front. If you get to untap with that card once, it is exactly a Siege Gang Commander. And I'm here for that. I am super here for that. And then the other 3-drop, I say the other 3-drop, Gruul Spellbreaker is a messed up Magic card. I talked at length about how much I loved Zerta Goblin in this shell. I really love Gruul Spellbreaker. I like choices, and I like the choice of a creature that never ever dies to my opponent's removal, or one that allows me to apply an unreasonable amount of pressure for 3 mana. The fact that it and I, or she and I, have hexproof on my turn, and that trample, and the choice of it being her being a 3/3 or being a 4/4, you know, 3/3 haste, 4/4, trample, hexproof on my turn, so you have to play in a mana inefficient manner in order to kill her. I'm here for that. I'm all the way here for that. That card is just really, really, really good. And last but not least, in the sort of proactive 3-drop slot, we have Domri, Anarch of Bolas. Not to be confused with Domri Chaosbringer, which a lot of the other builds are playing. We're not playing that many creatures. All things being equal as they are, we're not really playing that many creatures. So Domri is at its best. Just pumping your team for another swing in, using the fight ability to clear a blocker. You know, the fight ability doubles as like an extra burn spell a lot of the time. But even just going like jamming on turn 4, jamming Domri plus Zerta Goblin to add another 3 to your power, swinging in. That's fine. Or, you know, Domri plus Zerta Goblin, just add a 4/3 on defense. That's fine. You know, Domri basically plus any of our 2-drops, right? The fact that your creatures can't be countered is like gravy at that point. Because some amount of the time you're just going to go like Domri on turn 4 plus and lightning strike something out of the way. I mean, there's a lot of lines you can take using Domri's ability. You made Domri on turn 4 to clear a giant creature and still apply a lot of pressure. You know, Domri plus collision and kill a Lyra, or kill a Lyra or Shalai, so you can swing through and kill your opponent. Maybe that's what you got to do. I don't know, but I'm here for it. The card is good. And then for the non-creature spells, Luke is playing all 4 copies of Shock, all 4 copies of Lightning Strike, 2 copies of Light Up the Stage, which is interesting here, and I'm not sure if I'm here for that one. That's like my one real contested slot in this deck. You know, if you can think of something else you would rather play in that slot, if you're trying to kill your opponent, if there's something else you want in that slot, I can understand wanting to go that direction. And then last but not least, I believe it's 3 copies of Collision Colossus. That card's really good because it not only provides a +4/+2 pump spell, sometimes it just finishes your opponent off or finishes off a planeswalker or helps you beat through a bigger creature on the, you know, a ground stalling creature like a Ferox or something in the mirror, but it's also just an out to nearly every creature that's good against your deck. Like Lyra Dawnbringer, Aurelia, Seraph of the Scales, it takes care of the front half of her. Like, so many cards that are otherwise really good against your deck, and it's 2 mana, kill that thing. Without getting to trigger the lifelink, or without acknowledging the hexproof, without you getting to untap and do a bunch of stuff, like whatever. It's great. And then 20 lands, Luke had a dead split, you know, 8 duels, 4 Rootbound Crag, 4 Stomping Ground, and then 6 and 6 on the forests and mountains. I mean, that's the gist of the deck. It is Gruul, punch you in the face. And that's something I have a really high opinion of in this current standard format. Because it seems like a lot of these decks are like dirtily decks that really just have a plan for a long game. And you know what they say about having a plan. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So that's what this deck does really well. It just comes across the table and punches your opponent in the mouth. Tells them to have a plan now. And again, not for nothing, but this deck can just draw a turn 4 kill. Pelt Collector into Zerta into Gruul Spellbreaker is lethal on turn 4 with no other cards if they don't interact. It's exactly 20 on turn 4 if they don't interact with you. And even if they do, if they don't clear everything, a burn spell can clear things up. Or, you know, another haste creature can clear things up. As far as a sideboard plan goes, the deck is, I mean, pretty customizable. If you are like Luke was, Luke decided to go down the road that a lot of the mono red lists do, where they don't go bigger, they just like board into a few more sources of card advantage. In Luke's case, that's Experimental Frenzy and a couple of other things. Direfleet Daredevil is really good. But in the case of, I mean, I could understand if you wanted to go like add a couple of lands or add, you know, 3 more lands if you really want to go bigger and just like go into something like Rekindling Phoenix and maybe a Sarkhan or a Skargan Hellkite and just go like really big after sideboard to win your aggro mirrors or to just have more powerful cards against control. I personally don't like that line. I would lean more towards what Luke was doing with the original sideboard. And when I publish this and share it in the Facebook and Twitter groups, I'm going to put a screenshot of Luke's original list with the sideboard underneath. But again, like last week, I want to talk about sideboard plans. I want to talk about packages more than I want to try to get one from him and then share it and have everybody cookie cutter it. That's not like a moral thing. That's not like a I'm better than you because I don't use a sideboard guide thing. I just would rather have us learn from each other than throw the temptation out there of just copy, paste, do it without thinking. That's just me. If you want a sideboard guide from Lucas Faley, feel free to let me know and I will see if I can get him to share one. So, we'll get that out of the way. Next week's Deck Tech, I'm going to put the choices up on a poll again. Just like last week, it's going to be between Henry Mildenstein's Is It Wizards, which Henry has taken to rank 7 on Magic Arena. And it's either going to be Henry's Is It Wizards or it's going to be VTCLA's Blue-Black Terramander, which I have played a fair amount of on Arena myself. I just kind of accidentally had all the cards for it. But I've also watched VTCLA stream it, and it just looks really, really interesting. I don't want to go like completely crazy and say it's good, it's broke, or anything of the sort. It just looks really interesting. So let me know what you think. Let's get a discussion going about this sideboard. Things you like, things you don't like, things you change. I would not recommend making any changes until you play the deck if you can. I understand budgets are what they are. The nice thing about this deck is basically nothing in it is expensive except for Stomping Grounds. I think the most expensive card, the thing I paid the most for was Growth Chamber Guardian. And it was like $5 or $6. Pelt Collector was like $2 or $3. Thorn Lieutenant was like $1.50. And I guess War Boss, but I just like had those. I prioritized those early on. So I don't actually, I think War Boss has probably climbed up to around 6 or 7. So it's a little bit on the higher end of like a really, really bare bones budget, but I think it's worth it because basically none of it rotates and it's just really, really good. So check it out. Let me know what you think and we'll catch you on the next trip down the Homeward Path. See you later.